So, hey guys, recently I've watched this video. It's called something like Rarest Chess Moves. And yeah, that video was pretty interesting. So that got me thinking, huh, is there a Yu-Gi-Oh equivalent of that? Well, I mean, kind of, right? So, what would in my opinion, I guess that I don't really have this data, so it'd be my opinion, I guess, but what would the rarest Yu-Gi-Oh move be, or Yu-Gi-Oh uh, win condition be, or just the most unique way to win a game in Yu-Gi-Oh? So that got me thinking, and uh, Yu-Gi-Oh moves, we can't really do that because that would just be pretty boring, right? It would just be like activating this niche card that no one has ever played before. That kind of territory. I can't really figure that stuff out. Not really, right? So instead, we'll be doing win conditions or just method of winning. So I mean, pretty common method of just getting wins. Your opponent surrenders, and I mean that's probably how most games end, just by surrender. And then second most, I'm going to assume is probably just battle damage, right? So essentially dropping your opponent's life points to 0. The methodology which we could do this, I mean, we could argue that like if I attack you with like a Frostosaurus, probably doesn't happen that often that we get like Frostosaurus for game, but still, I think this has happened before. So, yeah, Frostosaurus attacking someone for game probably has come up at some point. So not that interesting, but how about maybe we look at more FTK type stuff? So there are a few ways you win FTK. So we can go by win condition, like something like an Exodia. This is totally possible, I guess. Just resolve Exodia's effect more or less. You can win the duel like that, but I mean, you've probably seen Exodia a good amount of times. So this has definitely been done before. It's not like as if no one has ever assembled all the pieces of Exodia before. I mean, I think Yugi does it in episode 1 of the anime, so that's at least one time it's happened. So I'll count it. But moving on. Aside from just win conditions, of course, there is like burning your opponent per game. So there are different ways you can kind of achieve burn per game. I mean, like with Vanquish Soul, which can burn for game, and you kind of need to burn at some point to get game. It doesn't necessarily have to be the last thing you do, but yeah, Vanquish Soul can kind of burn for game whenever. But if we're talking about like purely burning someone to just from 8k life to 0, I mean that's technically also a thing, but does that feel that uncommon? They're just FTKs and burn decks that can kind of accomplish this. So still not that interesting. If we go by just win condition, if we throw in the word win, a lot of things will show up because of how this search function works. Don't really know how to isolate this, but in well, a bunch of win conditions, we have a bunch of them, and because the cards that have win conditions, well, they have win conditions. Someone at some point has probably attempted or used most of these guys as win conditions. So flying elephant, during your next turn, if this card inflicts melee damage to your opponent by a direct attack, you win the duel. This has definitely happened before. If we go to Gimmick Puppet, we have is that 2 M's? Okay. We have 2 different win cons. We have C88 Gimmick Puppet Disaster Leo. So this has a win con here. And then we have Gimmick Puppet of Leo. This has a win con as well. I personally have done this win con in like really low rank around the start of Master Duel. Yeah, so I got the Gimmick Puppet win con before. So I know these are all like fairly doable. It's just not going to be a super common occurrence because who's playing Gimmick Puppet anyways. But if we're thinking like pretty obscene, like dumb OTK combos, there are a lot of different ways to kind of get in for it. So probably I'm not sure which would have less occurrences in terms of like really dumb niche FTKs, but or like ways to win the game, I guess. Um, well, you're borderline going to need to set up an FTK with some of these, and if your opponent has no actions they can do, even though they die on like turn 2, I'm still going to count that as an FTK. Like it's technically not an FTK, you could argue, but yeah, not that important. All right, so with Gimmick Puppet, we have an actual win con, but if we game our opponent with battle damage, that used to be kind of a more interesting kind of like win con. I mean, this probably doesn't come up that often, but with Yubel, you have like Nightmare Pain. Before, this was a lot cooler because it was harder to do, in my opinion. But you know, your opponent hits your monster and then they take damage, and it's only the. It's very important that it's just not just simply reflecting the battle damage, it's forcing your opponent to attack into your monster and then dying to battle damage. That was more niche. I guess it still is kind of more niche. It's like a subcategory of this type of attack your opponent's monsters kind of OTK or I guess game winning situation. So that's a little bit more interesting, but I am pretty much 100% certain that there is a card in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Which I've never heard of anyone OTKing with or winning with or whatever. Well, it's not an OTK, I guess, but yeah. So we'll get into that in a bit, but first, let's go over one more type of win condition. It's just deck out. So your opponent can no longer draw cards. So didn't really mention that, but technically there's like mill, there's like banish your opponent's deck, force them to draw to deck out. All of those technically work, I guess. Not super interesting in my opinion. Well, unless you do it in a funny way, I suppose. But all of these win conditions, you've definitely seen or heard of someone doing these before. Even something as whack as this fella, if I can find him. Let's see. Numeron Network. Numeron Chaos Ritual. This shows every single number. Why? That means if I check any of these guys, it'll show every single number as well, huh? How about Chaos Ritual? Oh well. Let's see. What was the name of this card? Numeronius. Let's try this. Okay. Numeronius. So we have let's see. Not this one. This one. Number IC 1000 Numeronia. This win condition's pretty absurd as well. At the end of your opponent's turn, if this card did not battle, you win the duel. The main issue with this is that you also have to summon this under these conditions. This has to be special summoned by the fact of number C 1000 Numeronia, so it's kind of more difficult than usual to cheat out in comparison to some other cards, so a little bit rough. But yeah. I have within like just I'm 100% certain no one has ever done this win con before, so we'll just go over it. So if we think about all of the ways that people have attempted to win in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, or essentially win a duel, I am 100% certain no one has ever used Relay Soul, and that is because Relay Soul special summons a monster from your hand while it is face up on your field. You take no damage when it leaves the field. Your opponent wins the duel. So Relay Soul, this is a pretty odd win condition, specifically because this doesn't really give you a win condition. This just in general gives you a a lose condition rather than a win condition. So if we have a relay soul, this wouldn't really do much for us. But what if instead of me, the owner of Relay Soul, activating Relay Soul, I force Relay Soul on my opponent and then force them to activate Relay Soul, and then destroying or removing my opponent's monster in some sort of maybe funny way, maybe not so funny way, and then we probably win the duel? Question mark. Probably. So if we do that, that'd be pretty interesting. If we want to get into like a more rare event, I guess it would probably be, rather than a win, I think a draw is probably rarer than a win or loss in Yu-Gi-Oh. So I don't know, something crazy would be, I don't know, let's say somehow we resolve like two different win conditions at the same time. That'd be pretty wild. Aside from Exodia, because two people with Exodia at the same time, I think I've seen that before. But I don't know, like something completely absurd. Like in terms of win condition, what would we possibly have that can trigger at the same time? Not really sure. Won't think too hard about that right now. But finishing the thought on Relay Soul, we can technically, if your opponent is the one to activate Relay Soul, they will lose the duel if the monster they control leaves the field by pretty much any means. So we'll have to start with, how do we give our opponent Relay Soul? So you might think, oh, that's easy, isn't it? Well, that's only step one. Even if we give our opponent Relay Soul, well, that they don't have to necessarily activate Relay Soul. But we'll just go through everything. So first thing that I did when I was researching this, I wanted to find like a way that you could set a trap, and maybe we can force our opponent to set a trap from somewhere. In this case, this was set from hand, so maybe I can exchange Relay Soul and then force my opponent to set it. But apparently, since this is optional, like, we're going to assume our opponent has no other traps aside from this exchange of spirit, or not exchange of spirit. I'm losing my marbles here. Relay Soul. In their hand or deck, they have no other traps. It's still optional to set, so even if we like trolled ourselves, then we can't force them to do that and then special summon Jinzo. Not really an option, so that doesn't work. And we can go through the list, but there is nothing that forces our opponent to set from the hand. It's literally not doable. Forcing our opponent to set a trap from the hand, yeah, that is literally not doable. So how is this win condition even achievable? Well, the thing is, it is doable. It's just absurdly stupid. Like, there's no way anyone would logically sit through this, and I don't think there's anyone who's logically going to find a way to do this. So feel pretty fine sharing this, but all right, I'm definitely not going to be the one that achieves a Relay Soul FTK. But one of the issues, I guess, for this not to be technically categorized as an FTK is we have to set Relay Soul for a turn and then activate it. Like, no matter what, that's probably something that's going to have to happen, unfortunately. So you would call this an OTK, but I mean, it is still a game-winning play, so we have that going for us. But all right, how exactly can we force Relay Soul to activate? Well, there is actually one card that does force your opponent to technically set a trap, and all I have to do is figure out how to spell. Like this, right? Okay, so let's go through these and see if I can find it. Nope, not this. This one. Goddess Verdande's Guidance. So this card here When this card is activated, if all monsters you control are Valkyrie monsters, you can add one Goddess Erd's Verdict from your deck to your hand, so that does nothing for us here. Once per turn, you can declare one type of card, monster, spell, or trap. Reveal the top card of your opponent's deck, and if it was the declared type, they set it to their field. Otherwise, they add it to their hand. You can only activate one Goddess Verdande's Guidance per turn. So this card is actually able to force our opponent to set a trap to the field. Otherwise, they add it to their hand. So how is this possible to accomplish? Well, there is a way, and it's really dumb. Of course. So we're going to need to then set up a Darkest Diabolos. Well, we just need to summon this, and then our opponent's hand, they need to have only Relay Soul. So we're going to have to somehow give our opponent a copy of Relay Soul, so that this is the only card in their hand. Then we resolve Darkest Diabolos. And then this has the effect right here of you contribute one dark monster. Your opponent places one card from their hand on either the top or bottom of the deck. So specifically with Goddess Verdande's Guidance, though, we'll need to reveal the top card of our opponent's deck and make sure it's actually Relay Soul. So do you know what that means? Because Darkest Diabolos gives the option of putting the card on either the top or the bottom of the deck. There's only one solution. We remove the entirety of our opponent's hand and deck. We have to not only hand loop our opponent, we have to also deck loop them, and then force them to put on. Just in this case, they have no cards in deck, so this would be the only card. We have to force Relay Soul to be the only card in their deck, and then we activate Goddess Verdande's Guidance. And then with this done, we can now set Relay Soul. And this is all just to set Relay Soul. And then part 2. Special summon a monster from your hand. While it is face up on your field, you take no damage. When it leaves the field, your opponent wins the duel. So now we just have to simply give our opponent a monster as well, and also prevent them from losing due to deck out, because we still need another turn. So yeah, very, very rough indeed. Because if our opponent were to attempt to draw, they have no cards in deck, because we needed them to have no cards in deck to resolve Relay Soul, or to set Relay Soul, our Relay Soul, to our opponent's field. And then after this, we have to still force our opponent to activate said Relay Soul. And to do that, technically you can use Bait Doll. Bad news, Bait Doll is not in the game of Master Duel right now, so bit problematic. But good news, there's a card that effectively replaces Bait Doll. So what Bait Doll essentially does is it forces a set back row to activate if it is a trap. If it is not activatable, it gets sent to the graveyard instead. So if it was just recently set, that would not be activatable and sent to the graveyard. I think something like that. So there is still a card that can force trap activations. We have Lightstar Trick Stage. If I could just spell this properly. Okay, so we have Trickstar Light Stage. So the effect here says, once per turn you can target a set card in your opponent's spell and trap zone. While this card is in the field zone, that set card cannot be activated until the end phase, and your opponent must activate it during the end phase or else send it to the graveyard. So we can use this effect on turn 3 to then target Relay Soul and force its activation in the end phase, and then we just need to simply remove our opponent's guy during the end phase. And that should be game. Also, now we have one more small obstacle to deal with. Our opponent needs a monster in hand for Relay Soul, so whatever we give them should not be normal summonable technically. That way we should prevent our opponent from setting cards, normal summoning cards, and special summoning cards, if they're relevant. So maybe only the first 2 are necessary, but yeah, our opponent needs to have a monster in hand for Relay Soul, and then we just simply do effect of Relay Soul and win the game, I guess. And technically you could give your opponent like just a really big guy that's not too useful, like I don't know, maybe we can give our opponent a Royal Obelisk or some other funny royal monster that you can't actually summon normally. And then we just out it, and that triggers Relay Soul. and that should be the game one. And I have never seen anyone do this before, so yeah, this is probably the rarest win condition in Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm pretty confident in saying that. So yeah, you've probably seen Banish deck out, Banish uh, just jank in general, you know, just burn for game, this win con, that win con. If a card has a win con on it, someone out there has probably achieved that win con some way, somehow. But how many people do you think have forced Relay Soul onto your opponent and then forced the activation of Relay Soul in order to trigger the lose condition of Relay Soul for your opponent in order to win the duel? I can't even easily put this into words, so we're clearly struggling here. Well, if you guys have any ideas for anything rarer than this, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And I highly doubt there is anything more rare and roundabout than this. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.